If you are a fantasy reader, you probably already know this feeling. You start one series, then another, and suddenly you have absolutely no idea what you actually read or what's still left to finish. That is exactly where I find myself right now. Hi everyone! Welcome back, or welcome if you are new. Today's video is going to be a little chaotic, but also very necessary. I'm a huge fantasy reader, which means I constantly end up lost in a maze of unfinished series. And recently, I had a realization that honestly caught me off guard. I don't even remember half of the series I started. So I did what any overwhelmed reader would do. I went on Goodreads and spent hours and hours trying to figure out how many series I'm actually following, which books I've already read, and most importantly, how many books I still have left. And I'm not going to lie, the results were a little terrifying. That's exactly why this video exists. This is my starting point, my baseline. From here on, I want to make a real effort to finish most of those series, catch up on the ones I abandoned halfway, and finally decide whether I want to continue or if I need to DNF this series. In a way, this is also the beginning of a new journey on this channel. I want to come back in future videos with updates, progress, and hopefully a growing number of completed series, because right now I am very much in the I have no idea what's going on phase of my reading life. At the same time, this process will help me organize and reorganize my priorities as a reader. I usually focus on arcs from NetGalley, and that's not going to change completely, but I do want to create a better balance by also prioritizing the missing books in the fantasy series I'm already started. And I am hoping that by doing this, I will feel less guilty and eventually give myself more freedom to pick up new books from new authors. Before we dive in, I want to clarify something. I have read many more fantasy series than the ones I'm talking about in this video. But if I already finished a series, I am not including here. And if I gave a book less than 3 stars, I probably didn't continue the series also. So what you are about to see are only the series that I'm in the middle and that I intend to continue. Here are all the duologies, trilogies, and sagas that I am in the middle of. Let's go. Before we actually begin, I wanted to show you that I had some of these books for quite some time, in both Portuguese and English, but I read most of them as ebooks or audiobooks. I think that the fact that I don't have them all yet also influences how much I want to read them right now. But let's go. Starting with Light Lark, of which I read the first book, I read Night Bane and Sky Shade. I still need to read Crown Tide, and it seems like another book is coming out this year, probably the last one. There is also a book from the male protagonist's point of view, but I don't intend to read it right now. Startide literally just came out and I already read it, but there will be other books. I don't know how many. You can see my opinion in my video about my March reads. I read all the books that start with The Cruel Prince, and I know there is a sequel in the same universe, so I need to read The Stolen Heir and The Prisoner's Throne. I've read all the books in Shadow and Bone and Six of Crows, but I've been stuck in King of Scars for ages and need to read Rule of Wolves. I read Wavenshaw in March, and you can see my review in my March reading video. But I know it's going to be a trilogy, so I will still read 2 more books in the future. In the Atlas series, I've only read the Atlas 6, and I still need to read the Atlas Paradox and the Atlas Complex. This is the first series I think I might give up on because I like the concept of the universe more than the first book itself, but I want to give it another chance. And Bloodwing Academy, I read On Wings and Blood, and I need to read The Bond That Burns and The Wings That Bind. I don't know if I intend to read everything. It will depend on the second book in the series because I loved the universe, but not so much the characters. I've read all the previous crowds of Nyaxia books, including those marked as 0.5, and I've read The Songbird and The Heart of Stone. But I still need to read The Fallen and the Kiss of Dust, The Lion and the Deathless Dark, and the book that's coming out next, if I'm correct. Now, a curious case. Of Cassandra Clare's books, I've read practically everything. But the Wicked Power series is coming out, and this year, I still need to read The Last King of Fairy, which is one of the books I'm most looking forward to this year. In The Eldest Curses, I still need to read The Red Scrolls of Magic and The Lost Book of the White, which I have in physical form. Of the other extra books and the Shadowhunters Chronicles, I still need to read The Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy, Ghosts of the Shadow Market, The Benny Chronicles, and A Sea Change. Moving on to another author, in the Villains and Virtues series, I already read Thrown in the Dark and Summoned to the Wilds, but I'm missing Eclipse of the Crown, and 2 extra books that I'm not sure if I will read. In the Witches of Aldaria series, I've read The Herbalwitch's Apprentice and The Herbalwitch Princess, and I still need to read The Charming Witch Seamstress and book 2.5, Bennett Turns into a Cat. In the Broken Blade series, I've read 5 Broken Blades and 4 Ruined Realms, and I still need to read 3 Shattered Souls. The Fire That Binds series, I've read everything that's available, Firebird and Bloodsinger. And for now, there are no new books, but I know we will have at least one more. In the Twin Crowns series, I've only read Twin Crowns, and I'm currently reading Cursed Crowns in audiobook while doing other things around the house. I also still need to read Burning Crowns and 2 extra books that I'm not sure if I will read right now. I read everything in the City of Phantom, The Dagger and the Flame, and The Rebel and the Rose. And it seems the 3rd book will be released this year, so my reading list will probably grow. Here I only read Heavenly Bodies and still need to read Fallen Stars and Holy Monsters. And if I'm not mistaken, I heard somewhere that the series will have 5 books in total. In Waterstone College, I've read Spellcaster and still need to read Night Witch. In Sands of Ariwa, I read We Hunt the Flame and still need to read We Free the Stars. I read Hush Hush many years ago, well after the hype had died down. But I have the others in the series here, except for the last one, and I intend to read Crescendo, Silence, and Finale sometime. I read Once Upon a Broken Heart and The Ballad of Never After, and I still need to read A Curse for True Love and the extra book that will be released this year, The Mirror of Infinite Endings. I don't know how many books there will be in this Stony Weather Kingdom series, but I read The Night and the Moth, and I still need to read The Knave and the Moon. In the Sacred Stones, I've only read A Dawn of Onyx, and I still need to read A Promise of Peridot and A Reign of Rose. My experience with Harker Academy is a bit curious, because as you can see in my March reading video, I didn't like Half City that much, and it will depend on what happens in the second book for me to decide whether I will continue reading or not. The Spiritan Trilogy, I've read Riftborn, and still need to read Duskbound and Realm Blade. I have the first trilogy of the All Souls series, and that's exactly what I intend to read from the series for now. So I read A Discovery of Witches, and will read Shadow of Night and The Book of Life. In the Eternal Path trilogy, I've read The Raven Scholar, and I don't know when we will have a new book. I literally just finished reading The Library of Amorlin, and I don't know when we'll have new books. In the Starkeeper series, I've read The Starlight Heir and need to read Queen of the Night Sky, and I have no idea how many books there will be. In the Fallen God series, I read God Killer, and I need to read Sunbringer and Faithbreaker. I read White Lights in March, and the book hasn't even been released yet, but I'm already anxious for the rest of the series. In the Aurora Cycle series, I read Aurora Rising, and I still need to read Aurora's End and Aurora Burning. In the Arcana Academy series, I read Arcana Academy, and I still need to read Prince of Swords. I read A Realm Undone in the Severed Era trilogy, and I'm waiting for new books. I read Assistant to the Villain and Apprentice to the Villain, and I still need to read Accomplice to the Villain and Adversary to the Villain. I read Serpent and Dove and need to read Blood and Honey and Gods and Monsters. I even have the second book here at home. In the Artisan trilogy, I read the 2 books, A Forbidden Alchemy and A Forsaken Prophecy, and I'm waiting for new books. In the Moonfall series, I read When the Moon Hatched and need to read The Ballad of Fallen Dragons. I read Eternal is the Night in March, and I'm hoping for new books. I read I Stood in Drowning and need to read A Theory of Dreaming and An Archive of Romance. A curious thing is that I read everything involving Percy Jackson up until 2014, and The House of Hades is even my favorite book, but for years I haven't had the courage to finish The Blood of Olympus, which is also preventing me from having the courage to read the new Percy Jackson books. So I need to read them. And Cursed Barrier, I read When Among Crows, and I need to read To Clutch a Razor. I read The Rose Bargain, and I need to read The Thorn Queen. I read A Language of Dragons, and I need to read A War of Wyverns. And finally, I read Dagger Moth in March, and I hope for new books soon. With that, if I counted correctly, I'm in the middle of 46 book series, and I still need to read 57 books that are already available, or I am sure will be released in the coming months. I think the list will change quite a bit over the months, so I'll keeping you updated as I read new books. And that was the video. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope to soon have new content for you showing my reading progress in this series. Thank you for watching, and until next time.